and the content and everything that David said blew a lot of minds and gave people a lot to think about. And I said, oh my goodness, we have to share that.
Yeah, so
in our butterfly.
So today, big shout out to freshman representative Melissa Blasek of New Hampshire.
Yes, go Melissa.
Melissa is the sponsor of HRC 2. And today she was the sponsor of the bill. I was asked to testify on ending the state of emergency in the state of New Hampshire.
Yahoo!
And what a great person. A delight to work with. Melissa is one of those people who got into politics because she saw a world that was not going in the right direction and said, I think I'm going to do something about it. Big shout out.
That's what we love.
To Melissa. And so the testimony this morning, once again, was me and several other experts asked by the committee, Legislative Affairs Committee, to testify in support of HRC 2 in New Hampshire. And my testimony was funny in that a number of people were clearly blindsided by what I shared.
Yes.
And if you pay attention, it turns out that while this was written for the actions taken by Governor Chris Sununu in New Hampshire, it is a good idea if you listen carefully to this. You may even want to record it or transcribe it because the likelihood that this exact same information happened in your state is almost 100% because it happened in every state.
Yep.
That's why. But Sununu made a particular lie that I'm going to point out, which was unique to only a few states. But here's what I said in my testimony. On March 13th, 2020, acting on unconfirmed and misleading data, Governor Chris T. Sununu recited false claims to justify a declaration of a state of emergency in New Hampshire. In the preamble to this declaration, number one, he recited the causal statement linking a novel coronavirus to a disease with no evidence then or now substantiating that claim. At the time, several dozen known variants of SARS-CoV were published and no clinical evidence showed a, quote, virus, unquote, to be uniquely, quote, causing, end quote, a disease. In fact, according to research published in the Annals of Internal Medicine, as many as 45% of people testing positive for the RT-PCR determined infection with SARS-CoV-2 fragments never manifest COVID symptoms at all. That's an interesting little point. But what was also interesting, and I added this in my testimony, was that there was an interesting article recently in Nature. And the article was, Where Did COVID Come From? 5 Mysteries That Remain. Now, you'll remember that part of the reason why we have a mystery, and I'm going to get to this a little later on, part of the reason why we have a mystery is because we're willfully not asking the right questions. Because if we were asking the right questions, there would be a lot less mystery. But as long as we keep asking questions that have answers in the ether, it seems quite unsurprising that we're not getting answers. But it is important to point out that a couple very interesting things were reported in Nature. First, between October and December, 100 people with symptoms of COVID-19, and you heard me correctly, between October and December of 2019. So before the Wuhan outbreak, allegedly, there were about 100 people who had symptoms of COVID-19. Of them, 67 were blood tested. And of those 67 blood tests, not a single one of them had evidence of SARS-CoV-2.
Wow.
Which would beg the question, how do we get to a causality link when we have COVID without virus? And then, as I reported in the Annals of Internal Medicine, we have virus very frequently with no symptoms. So it does blow apart the entire story using, once again, scientific data alone, not using anything else. Using scientific data alone, it blows apart the story of causality. It does not necessarily say that there may not be an association, but it does say that the statement that something is caused by a thing is false. And there's no way to wiggle out of that. Now, it gets worse because in the Nature article, they made reference to the European Journal of Epidemiology paper by Fabrice Carat and a whole bunch of others, senior author Marie Zins. And in that article, there were samples that were collected, serum samples that were collected from 9,144 adults in the French general population. They were sampled between November 2019 and January 2020. So this is once again prior to the Wuhan outbreak. Those samples were taken. And ironically, in 11 of those samples, there were evidence of SARS-CoV-2 infection in France prior to anything ever being reported in China.
Very confusing.
What makes it even more interesting is that if you go back and look at the 959 adults participating in a similar trial in Italy, we see that 11.6% of them had positive evidence of SARS infection, SARS-CoV-2-like infection, that date back as early as September of 2019. Now, the reason why that's important, people, is that these articles, and by the way, the article that that came out is peer-reviewed. It's in the European Journal of Epidemiology. This is not some sort of kind of med review, scraping the bottom of the barrel kind of thing. It's actually pretty important to look at the fact that science, using its own science, has shown that as early as September of 2019, Italy and the rest of Europe already had immunity to SARS-CoV-2. So every statement that's been made in every governor's declaration is false, because it wasn't a novel virus in December or January or February, and it was not uniquely creating a disease which in fact had been around at least since sometime in the fall of 2019. And if we look at the Chinese data from Wuhan Institute of Virology, we know that the symptoms go back to 2013. So neither a novel virus nor a novel disease. Then I will resume what I testified today. While there may be an association as yet unproven linking the virus to the list of symptoms now aggregated under COVID-19 designation, at the time of this declaration, both the statement of novelty and causality were conjecture, not fact. Now, what does that mean? By the way, there is no harm in a governor for a very short period of time hearing of the potential of a concern and saying, hey, for a couple days, for a couple weeks, until we get our arms around this thing, we're going to go ahead and take precautions. There is nothing wrong. That's good leadership. But that would be good leadership if it was a few days or a few weeks, and
not prolonged.
If any independent inquiry was used to validate the evidence of the potential threat. The problem is that in the state of New Hampshire, just like across this country, neither one of those steps were taken. This was not a best judgment kind of thing, because we get to the second clause, which is even more willfully false. In the second clause, Governor Sununu stated, the state of New Hampshire has, quote, has been working in close collaboration with CDC since December 2019 to monitor and plan for the potential spread of COVID-19 to the United States. This claim tests credibility, as COVID-19 was not identified nor named until February 2020. So somehow or another, Governor Sununu, just once again breaking script here, Governor Sununu was actually capable of knowing that there was a thing called COVID-19 3 months before COVID-19 was even named or branded or discussed or designated or whatever. So that's kind of an interesting little question. How that happened is no small mystery. And the third, relying on computer simulations from the United Kingdom, he recited unproven allegations about the spread of COVID-19 as erroneous statement as viruses, not symptoms, can spread. And that's, by the way, don't jump on this one and go, oh, you're saying viruses are real. No, I'm not. I'm just saying that symptoms do not spread at all. If anything spreads, there is potentially the spread of pathogens. There are spreads of other things, but symptoms do not spread. Therefore, COVID-19 cannot spread by definition. it cannot spread. Another statement that has not yet been proven or established with any clinical data. In short, relying on hearsay rather than on any independent inquiry, Governor Sununu enacted a state of emergency in coordination with others without considering the ample evidence to indicate that factors other than a public health emergency were in play. Preservation of the state of emergency serves commercial interests under the PrEP Act for the limitation of liability for medical countermeasures, but serves no public health interest. Now, I reported that, and then there was a very particular other thing that I also reported. And the other thing I reported was to recite once again the fact that in 2016, and I'm going to keep reading this because everyone needs to hear it. Peter Daszak, once again, from 2016, February 2016, we need to increase public understanding of the need for medical countermeasures, such as a pan-coronavirus vaccine. A key driver is the media, and the economics will follow the hype. We need to use that hype to our advantage to get to the real issues. Investors will respond if they see profit at the end of the process. That phrase, read to the New Hampshire representatives, apparently got a couple of them a little tiny bit teensy-weensy nervous.
Brilliant.
Because you're not supposed to read that, and you're not supposed to put that into the public record, and guess what yours truly did. That's right. I put it in the public record.
Go, Davo.
So